Student asked me, do you have anger toward the terrorist? Thought about it and I said, probably in the beginning, yeah. But then afterwards, no. And it's not because, that I was so good as a Christian that I could just forgive like that. I realized that I do have the grace to forgive, but it was, why do I want to carry that with me for the rest of my life? So that was the main reason. I just have to let that go, because that's going to become a source of stress and ultimately anxiety. Doesn't mean I didn't want to see him come to justice or anything like that, but I realized that was something that would help me and help the people that I needed to help. My name is John Picarello, retired New York City firefighter, and at that time was also the senior pastor of House on the Rock Christian Fellowship located on Staten Island. On 9/11, I was assigned to the 4-0 Battalion in the Sunset Park section of Brooklyn, so it must have been around a little after 8 when that alarm came in, and we responded into Manhattan. And going down 4th Avenue, I took a look. Every once in a while, you'd see a plume of smoke coming up from the North Tower. So we're doing size up right away. And I'm thinking, all right, that's got to be about the 70th floor, 80th floor. And so the chief says, you know what, put on the radio and see if we can catch a reporter. So sure enough, he does. And they were just flagging down people who were fleeing and asking him, what did you see? As he's talking, we hear a sound. And then we hear the reporter say, oh my God, the South Tower was just hit by another plane. And we looked at each other and we said the same word at the same time, the chief and I. We said, terrorist. This is terrorism. So we start to make our way through the walkway which led from the lobby of the hotel into the North Tower lobby. And suddenly the whole lobby, and we're in the hotel now, just started vibrating. Now, I was never in an earthquake, but I imagine this is what it's got to feel like. And so we just started to run for cover and just look for a wall or a pillar. And I remember I took maybe 4 steps to the right and everything just came crashing down around us. And in a second, on the floor, and then it was just dead silence. And it was maybe about 15 or so people with us. At that point, we decided to break up into 2 groups. One would look for a way out because you couldn't get into the lobby of the North Tower. That was all caved in, and it was nothing but steel, concrete, just from floor to ceiling. One end to the other, so you couldn't go back. So we're basically trapped. I stayed with the second group because we heard a cry for help from inside. It looked like a wall, but actually it was debris. We just started pulling debris out and just started to change to get it out of there. And we were able to uncover 2 guys, I think they were lieutenants. And we just started walking and we felt a breeze. There was another door just beyond that, forced that, and you could see the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, but that was it. You could see light at the end of the tunnel, and it opened out into West Street. So I turned around to Larry Stack, and I said to him, I'll stay with you guys as you can. He's calling you. And so I turned around and looked. He's the chief of the department. He said, you got to go. So I turned right. Now, at this point, I had no idea. You had 2 minutes left, and that North Tower was coming down. And so I started walking. I got under the North Bridge. And I just stopped and looked over my shoulder at the North Tower and just looked up at it. Is this going to fall off the building? It'll be like a 30-story javelin coming down. While I was looking at that, North Tower, let's go. Where I felt like something pulled me. And the thought says, this is not a dream, we got to run. And I heard that from all the first responders, the same thing happened. So I just took off, I started running, got across Vesey. The corner of my eye, things were getting darker, and I looked, there was a truck there. It looked like somebody just pulled in and just took off. And as that's my only hope, I can't run anymore, so I dove behind the truck, and this stuff blew past like a hurricane. I mean, that truck was moving, I heard things flying and breaking and so on and so forth. The sound was incredible, it was like a hurricane. And I'm just waiting, and then just in a few seconds, it was again that same silence, this eerie, deathly silence. They said it took 4 minutes to lift. I don't know, for me it seemed like forever. And when it lifted, the eerie thing was the muffled sound, like after a blizzard. And the North Bridge that I had just took a break on was just crushed down to the ground. And I stood there, I would say probably about 2 or 3 minutes, just taking this in, just looking from left all the way to the right, panning it. As far as your eye can see is debris. These giant steel girders just mangled, piled up, and I'm just wondering, man, I don't know how we're going to get a handle on this. And I just looked for somebody I could help, and just got in. There was a group of guys, and just got in. We're just helping them, just look for people. So in the following weeks after 9/11, you start to get the tally of the casualties and so on. And In the end, I lost 24 friends on the fire department. One of them was a lieutenant, Phil Petty, who I grew up with, went to grammar school together, did the Boy Scouts together, and so on. That hit home because I found out later that he was in the Marriott where we got trapped. What he was doing was he ran back up. He had his company go out. He told the guys they had to get out, and he was answering a call for help, and he went back up, and he got caught in the collapse of the North Tower. My wife and I both became acquainted with post-trauma. So what helped me was that in the coming weeks, you'd have the recurring dreams. And sometimes I'd be in the kitchen in the morning and having a coffee and a truck would pass by and the vibrations, instantly emotionally be back at ground zero. And then also being asked to speak. I traveled around the country for 2 years after that. And having to field questions. And really the questions forced me to really examine myself. How do I feel about that? What were my thoughts about that? And doing that for 2 years, I find out afterwards, looking back, that was the therapy. When I dove behind that truck, I talked to God from the 23rd Psalm. I said, God, you promised we'd walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I said, Lord, you promised that I won't fear any evil, and I don't fear evil, and I said, you promised. And it wasn't because I thought I was going to survive and went back to help people. I just had a calm that I was going to be all right. With that, there was that faith, and I guess at the same time, I was praying for just families, because you can hear the roll call sometimes. There'd be roll call of people they found, and if he doesn't redirect me, when I came out of the building, because I was going to go left. And I found out later, anybody who went left didn't survive the second collapse. I had to see the hand of God. I don't know the why, I just knew. I was able to talk to a number of members of my company. They would come at night, sort of like a Nicodemus kind of thing. I remember one guy, I was in the back room downstairs, and he asked me point blank. He says, you think God will forgive somebody like me? He looked at me, and I wasn't ready for this. He says, I'm afraid to die. That opened the door wide open. I just shared the gospel. To me, look, he didn't believe me at first. I said, God loves me. And I says, he loves you. He loves everybody. I said, he may not condone what you're doing, but he's crazy about you. Could you get me a Bible? I said, I can get you a Bible. He's not the first one who asked that. I'm going to leave my locker unlocked. He says, put a Bible in there, then lock it. He came to Christ. And there was many things, many cases like that where I talked to them. And in fact, one thing that stood out is from 9/11 on to the rest of the time I was in that company, they asked me to ask the blessing over the meal when we ate. So a lot of good came out of it.